Shameless Picture Show is part of the Cinepunks Network. If you like the Shameless Picture Show and you want to hear other great shows like it, make sure you check out the Cinepunks Network. You can find them at www.cinepunks.com. That's CINEPUNX. There's other great shows such as Cinepunks. There's The Carnage Report, Cinema Smorgasbord, Fat Girl Hacks, Loud, Fast, Philly, Tomb of Ideas, and Twitch of the Death Nerve, and so much more. If you like punk rock and you like movies, make sure to go to www.cinepunks.com. And let's not forget the sponsors for the Cinepunks Network. We have the Lehigh Valley Apparel Creations. They are the premier screen printer of the Lehigh Valley with service to the whole country, professional and personable in a way that only a DIY business can be. They also have ridiculously low prices for whatever your screen printing needs may be. You can visit them online at xlvacx.com. That's xlvacx.com. Lehigh Valley Apparel Creations. We also have the Essex Coffee Roasters. All their coffee is roasted to order. They have high quality beans, bunch of apparel, and tea available. They are bringing high quality coffee to the masses without the pretentiousness. Use the code Cinepunks for 10% off your first order. You can visit them at www.essexcoffeeroasters.com. That's ESSEX, coffeeroasters.com. Once again, use the code Cinepunks for 10% off your first order.
Hey, Shame listeners, Austin here, editor of the show. Just wanted to give you guys a heads up about the audio on this episode. Michael had some trouble with StreamYard, and it recorded everything to one track, so the levels aren't perfect. And there's also this weird hum that is present throughout the entire show. I did my best to clean it up in post, but it is still pretty noticeable. Other than that, this is a great interview with Phil Hopkins from Film Masters, so please enjoy.
Warning! This movie podcast actually discusses movies. Be aware that it may discuss any of the following elements: endings, surprise twists, unexpected cameos, and all manner of spoilers. If this doesn't appeal to you, then why listen to a movie podcast? Without further ado, please enjoy our feature presentation, The Shameless Picture Show.
Hello and welcome to another episode of The Shameless Picture Show. I am your host, Michael Viers, and today I'm thrilled to be joined by Phil Hopkins, the president of Film Masters, an exciting new boutique home media label dedicated to bringing meticulously restored classics to film lovers everywhere. Phil is a renowned film archivist and producer with over 2 decades of experience in film restoration and preservation. As one of the leading experts in the field, he has overseen the retrieval and restoration of countless classic films, managing an impressive collection of over 10,000 archival titles from prestigious institutions like UCLA, the Academy of Motion Pictures Arts and Sciences, the Library of Congress, and Warner Brothers. He's played a pivotal role in restoring hundreds of beloved films for platforms like Turner Classic Movies, Amazon, Hulu, and PBS. Thank you very much for joining me today, Phil.
Thank you for having me, Michael.
So we talked a little bit off mic before we got started, and I'm loving that I'm finding this intersection of people involved in the home entertainment world, specifically movies, who are also huge music nerds. I'm learning. And did you tell me off mic that you also used to release music as well?
I did. I'm actually a musician, so I come out of the whole kind of punk ethos DIY movement from the 80s, which was all about fanzines and putting out, your own cassettes and vinyl 45, RPM records to get played mostly on what was, college radio stations that were playing this type of stuff. So I understand kind of in terms of a marketing play when you're putting out indie things, whether it's indie film or indie music, that the mainstream doesn't always embrace the types of things that you care about. And ultimately, you're playing to an audience that is really as impassioned as you are, right? So I think, what you do with the podcast and your love of film and also music, I think there's a lot of people like us who kind of split time between the two, and those two roads meet more often than not from my perspective.
So what kind of music did you used to play, or do you still play?
I play not as often. I'm doing more, film-related projects in the past 2 decades. But back in the day, as they say, I'm a bass player, and I was playing in a number of different Boston bands through the 80s and through the 90s, and did a lot of touring and cut a couple of records and did that and spent a considerable amount of time in the band. And then sort of around the same time, I had a indie record label, and we were putting out a combination of re-releases of world music and old Jamaican reggae and ska music. And that the indie label led to, and that's the weird thing, is that kind of, how did you get into this whole thing? It ultimately led with music, but at the same time, a parallel time, I was still a huge fan of classic movies, indie films, horror movies. I'm kind of at that sort of tail end of the monster kid generation, but also a child and a byproduct of the 80s. So when I got into being an owner of a record label, one of the things that was happening was DVD and CDs were kind of the medium. And a friend of mine who was a filmmaker knew that I had distribution. And he was trying to get his film, which was a documentary called Sex, Drugs, and Democracy, into retail. That was a big deal. The fact that I could get music onto CD and release it into retail stores was a big deal. So he asked me if I could help him distribute his film. And at the time, nobody was that interested in indie documentary. And I came up with the idea of taking a soundtrack off the documentary and releasing it separately. And that was interesting because we were going to package a CD and a DVD together. And then I came up with the cockamamie concept of putting Reefer Madness on the DVD, because the film was all about social democracy and the sort of freedom of living in the Netherlands. And a lot of it was steeped in kind of the legalization of marijuana over there versus back at the time in the late 90s. It wasn't legal here. So I put Reefer Madness as a bonus feature, and the thing sold a ton of copies. And at that moment, I realized I could actually make more money putting old 16 millimeter films onto DVD that I was making, selling, 500 re-releases of a bunch of old music on CD. And that was sort of the turning point for me getting into home media.
It's funny that you mentioned it, because I'm actually surprised there hasn't been more of that. More of releasing a soundtrack to a film and then packaging the film with it. Like I have right behind me a record of Santa Claus Conquers the Martians that also has the movie with it.
Yeah, that was, we actually put that out with Something Weird and Modern Harmonic. So you've got the green vinyl copy?
I wasn't 100% sure if this was you guys or not, but yeah, I've got it right here.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So we put that out in partnership with Something Weird Video.
Oh yeah, look at that, Film Detective. It's right there. And
yeah,
that wasn't a plant. That was just me just going off of your story.
Well, you're spot on. So we love that. And then I did that also previously when we put out with Film Detective the Charles Manson film, The Other Side of Madness.
I've never seen that one.
The film, the soundtrack to the film is Manson. It's actual Manson music.
Oh,
and
okay.
And the producer, Wade Williams, when he was making the film, it was during the trial. The trial was still like early on. They hadn't actually gone to trial when he got the rights to make the film. He licensed the rights to his music and got tapes of Charles Manson, all that Mechanical Man stuff that's been released, through countless bootleg outfits. We included a re-release of that, a very rare soundtrack release with that. And that's So I love that. Yeah, no, I think I would love to see more of that. I think you're right. There's not enough of that because there's so many cool soundtracks that just don't get attention. And why I think the biggest obstacle with music is you have to pay mechanicals on compositions. And unless you're dealing directly with the artist or the label is sort of sympathetic to the fact that you're doing this not for a huge gain, most of the catalog of music ownership is through the big conglomerates, and they tend to not cooperate with licensing music for projects like that. And it becomes cost prohibitive in many cases. But I think I still love the concept. And I think if people could get, the major owners of these catalogs to give them reduced royalties, you could see more of those sort of package combo releases that I think would be cool as hell.
Yeah, like I'm always very super appreciative as a music nerd, because film music is kind of what got me into record collecting. I've always, it's kind of on the same token. I've always appreciated when labels would also, if they could find the surviving elements for the soundtrack, where they would also release a music only cut of the film. Like I remember Nick Redman of Twilight Time used to do that all the time. It was they didn't do a lot of special features, but that was usually one of the ones you could count on. And I'm there with you because right now, and I'd love to get your perspective on this as well. Physical media and home media is in a weird spot. I don't believe the doom and gloom that a lot of people do, that it's on its last leg and it's dying. I just think it's gone back. It's reverted back to where it started, is that it's a boutique thing. I tell friends of mine all the time that, yeah, it sucks that you can't go to a Best Buy and pick up a new movie, but that wasn't a thing for the longest time. When Laserdisc and VHS were first coming out, you bought them from catalogs.
Oh, absolutely. You're 100% correct. And I think we have come full circle. I think and this is why the industry doesn't understand what we do as a whole, right? They group in boutique companies to mass merchant stuff. So if Warner Brothers or Universal and all the big studios are now going into the reality of licensing their stuff to third parties like Kino Lorber and Arrow and whatnot, they're not interested. The bean counters at those big companies would never justify the return of what it costs to get these into the small retail distribution chain that's out there now, because they don't see the value, right? They don't see the return. So they're licensing it to smaller companies. And then the buyers of this stuff, it's not like people are going into a big chain and coming home with a bunch of DVDs for the kids. I mean, people are streaming everything. So it's a collector's market, just like it was, to your point, when Laserdisc and when I was going to early shows like Chiller when they first started, I would go to the collectors who were making homemade VHS tapes off of 16 millimeter collector's prints. I was spending a small fortune buying like Coffin Joe VHS tapes and early Lugosi monogram, and they were $20 to get this on a VHS from a 16 millimeter doopy print, because you couldn't get it, you couldn't see it anywhere, and that was the best you could get. So I think it's a whole new proposition now. For me, it's kind of like going back to finding better elements to upgrade stuff that I personally want to see better versions of, and people that are kindred to, liking a lot of the similar types of things that we release. And also the fact that we're not competing with the big sort of chains at this point. This is a catalog business in a small e-tail scenario, and you're selling a fraction of what the majors were selling 20 years ago. But it's no different with vinyl. I think that the health of the industry is indicative of what vinyl is in terms of being able to actually put out curated, nice releases that are remastered 180 gram vinyl, and then tie it into the vinyl community, which you're part of and I'm part of. And I think that there's a connective tissue with those people. They're going to buy they're going to buy vinyl that maybe they had on CD or cassette previously because it's physical media that's repackaged, and it's going to be sounding better, and it's actually, looking better. And the same thing with physical media. A lot of the stuff that still hasn't come out in decent resolution, you're not going to sell that to a casual fan. You're going to sell that to a deep cinephile collector who's kind of nerdy about this stuff. But that's not the mainstream, Netflix kind of Hulu audience that cares about that stuff.
Exactly. And I honestly feel like, as physical media collectors, we are in a new golden age. There is stuff coming out in such a rapid rate that I don't think we're seeing stuff coming out, and your label Film Masters is definitely contributing to that I don't think anyone ever assumed they would get a good version of. I'm going to use one of your titles as an example. A film that I had seen because of one of those, and this is not me knocking them because I saw a lot of weird stuff because of it, but I'd seen on one of those Mill Creek 50 horror movies, that look probably worse than VHS on a lot of those transfers, because they're just finding whatever's available, throwing as many on a disc as they can, compressing it to hell, and moving on. A film that I saw because of one of those that I didn't like the first time, I had a completely new experience because of Film Masters, and that's Tormented. It's a film that I just was not into, but then I saw the new restoration that you guys did for Tormented, and same thing with the giant Gila monster, and it changed my perspective on it. And when I was younger, I was just trying to see anything and everything. I didn't care about quality. Like, now I'm in a place where I want the best possible quality that's available if I can, because I am an AV nerd. I have a full surround sound in the house. I have a calibrated television, things that I feel like I need as a person who reviews picture quality and audio quality. But we are getting nice restorations of these films that I don't think anyone could have anticipated.
You're so right. And I think that when you see something that looks as close to the original, and in some cases, it may be even better, because don't forget, when a lot of these films were shown, they weren't necessarily shown in the correct aspect ratio. They were shown in secondary venues, and the release prints were not plentiful, so sometimes they were shuttling the same 2 or 3 prints across the country. So by the time it got to the destination that you were screening it, it was probably chock full of jump cuts and emulsion scratches. So yes, technology is our friend in terms of what we're able to do with restoration from a visual and from a sound perspective. And when you see something that's really sharp and clean, and it has a very good sort of silvery grayscale, and you can see detail, it's a different proposition than if you're seeing it in standard definition from an old doopy 16 print that's a 10th generation video copy.
Exactly. And I've been curious. So one of the things that stood out to me when I was doing a little bit of research for this episode, so I love that you came from the music world, and you transitioned in kind of an unusual way to the world of film through music by releasing that documentary soundtrack. What was your journey like in the world of film? Like, did you have a goal in mind, or were you just kind of chasing cars and seeing where they took you? Because I'm impressed to see that you work with restoration and preservation, which is an area of film culture that I'm very passionate about. Like, how did you get involved with that?
So it's a great question, and I think the two roads between music and film started really at a very young age. So when I was a little kid, back when I was probably 5 or 6 years old, I had an uncle who had all of our family home movies on 16 millimeter. And I was fascinated by the reels that had images of my dad and my grandparents as young people. And back in the late 60s, early 70s, it was a ritual for families to actually project films, old pictures of the films that were of relatives and of events to younger generations. It became a sort of a ritual to do that for everyone in the new generation. You get to see the films. And then as time went on, people lost interest in it. But the films were kind of still in my mind because I loved the whole aesthetic of it. And I became, at a very young age, I became the custodian of 100 reels of 16 millimeter film. And then that kind of led to the AV geek beginning, because I was also into music. I was collecting the records that belonged to my grandparents and my great aunts and uncles that included soundtracks, that were common in everyone's suburban home. You had the vinyl recording of JFK's speech. You had Sing Along with Mitch. You had all these sort of records that you see at every Goodwill store in America right now. But I love that. I love playing those. I love playing Tijuana Brass, the Whipped Cream and Other Delights, Herb Albert and the Tijuana Brass.
I've seen that at so many Goodwills, but it's such a great album.
It's an amazing album. But again, so I had that stuff in my wheelhouse with film, and the two were equally important to me. I just never knew you could actually, make a living, sort of like futzing around with old film. And I used to collect film, truncated copies of a lot of older films back in the sort of golden era of Black Hawk and Castle Films. You could go to a department store, you could go to a flea market and buy these sort of digest versions of feature films that you would be able to project on your 16 or 8 millimeter projector. And that was how I was able to bait family members to watch film again, because everyone was so bored by the home movies. They'd seen them 100 times. When I was able to get like Chaplin shorts or some Buster Keaton shorts, or even some horror movies that were digest versions, like early Corman films. I remember having I had a copy of The Raven, and these were amazing. So you could be projectionist to a group of people, and I was projectionist at a very early age to family members, and then later in life to neighborhood friends and kids in the neighborhood, where we would actually project the movies and do our own kind of creature feature. In Boston, growing up in suburban Boston, we had this amazing regional show called Creature Double Feature. Mm-hmm. And that was another primer for me, because you got everything from the Universal horror movies to the 50s sci-fi and B films to Ed Wood. You got the entire canon of all that stuff that I was reading in Famous Monsters of Filmland. And then I discovered there was a newsprint publication called The Big Reel. And that was effectively a bunch of film collectors advertising for selling copies of films and looking for copies. And that was the sort of beginning of my collecting 16 millimeter feature films, was through this sort of publication called The Big Reel. And so I think it's a weird road, because while I was in school, in high school, we had a television production facility. So I had access to video equipment. I had access to cameras and lighting and audio. So I was able to go out with a 3/4 inch portable remote camera and tape deck and record bands and record, like skits, and make, our sort of pretend horror movies, emulate, what we were trying to do was just making independent film without even knowing we were doing that. We're just making sort of a goofy neighborhood, or, guys in my school, would dress up and we would act out these films. And then we would get better at it, and then we would cut in stock footage that I had in 16 millimeters. So all of that effectively came out of just being a little nerdy film geek. And then with the music, I had all these records that belonged to my grandparents. And then I had two older sisters that were into the Beatles and all the classic rock from the 60s and 70s. And then I started listening to college radio because I was into weird things. And that's when I heard bands like the Sex Pistols, the Clash, the Jam, Boston bands that were, kind of like part of an early punk scene, like SSD Control and Jerry's Kids and the FUs and Gangrene. And my head exploded. I had all this sort of stuff that was then available to listen to. And then you would go into Boston and find these cool record stores that actually would sell the vinyl, but like the Big Reel, you also had fanzines like Maximum Rock and Roll and Flipside and things like that you could actually order directly from the labels of the bands. So those two worlds collided between music and film, but then music really took over because I started playing bass and I got into a band, and I was doing that more often than not. And then I did that for a very long time, and then eventually started a label. And that's when we came, sort of full circle, the beginning of this conversation when my friend made that documentary. And then I had sort of the experience of working with film and had some film, and we included the soundtrack and produced the DVD, and then tagged. There was that golden moment of tagging Refurb Madness onto that documentary that I immediately realized, okay, there's a whole bunch of film out there, and like Something Weird Video, like a lot of those sort of companies that were trailblazers. I mean, before anyone was doing this, Something Weird Video was doing it for over a decade and doing it really well. And I think that, to me, I was a massive fan of that. I was buying Something Weird Videos. I was buying Sinister Cinema was another outfit that was doing it. And they were fringy, to me, they were like punk rock. They were doing the same thing. They were putting out cool VHS and DVDs and putting a ton of extra stuff. So you'd have like a bunch of trailers, you'd have educational films, and it was just amazing. That to me was sort of like my golden era, was when all those companies were finding rare film, transferring it, putting it out, cranking it out, and you were seeing things that you would never see on television, you would never see in your mainstream local video store. But yet you were also getting a huge education to people like Dave Friedman and Doris Wishburne and like Herschel Gordon Lewis and all these filmmakers who I had kind of heard about, but I had never seen their films before because they weren't showing those films on Creature Double Feature.
No, that's wonderful. I don't think Something Weird gets the accolades it deserves in a lot of ways. Like, there are definitely, like you said, they're that punk rock band that was very big for a small group of people, but they just never quite hit it big. Like, they were very good at what they did, but I just don't feel like they're on the tip of people's tongues as much as they should have been. And I still have some of their funny enough, I went to film school and I had a film professor give me, because he knew I'd appreciate it, I still have some of the Something Weird VHS trailer compilations that they used to put out. And those are just a treasure trove of weird stuff, because some of those films you still can't find.
You still can't find. And I think that at the time, so in the 90s, when Something Weird was doing really well with releases, they had their own TV show. It was actually on the USA Network. And they were showing a lot of sort of these films. USA in the 90s was an amazing network. You had Mystery Science Theater, you had Gilbert Gottfried, you had Rhonda Shepherd up all night, with these crazy movies. And then Something Weird had briefly their own sort of show for a brief second. And they were never, because the author got sick and he wasn't able to sort of keep going in the direction he would have gone had he not, get sick and eventually passed away, sadly. But they were doing it so well, and I agree. They don't get the credit because they weren't able to take advantage of the technology like some of the younger companies that you mentioned who came out maybe 10 years ago. Something Weird was doing this back in the late 80s, early 90s. And I think if Mike Ferrini had lived, you would have seen them grow to 4K and Ultra HD, and he would have continued to put more of the stuff, I think, at least. But I think because he passed away, and then newer companies like Severin and Arrow, and they became kind of the focal point because they were the first ones to put a lot of 4K into the market. But I think Something Weird doesn't get the credit that they deserve because they were trailblazers. And there's so much of the stuff that would have been thrown in dumpsters, a lot of these films, had they not been saved and preserved by that company.
Yeah, for me, the ones I think of when I think of the companies that were, like you said, trailblazers, is obviously Something Weird. I think Anchor Bay has their place for saving a lot of these films. And then by extension to that, you have Bill Lustig's Blue Underground. They were, those, and there were others, don't get me wrong, but those are the ones that I think of who kind of put out a template for what a lot of these newer companies are doing. And honestly, the thing I'm most impressed by is I'm impressed that, and this goes for all of you guys, that you're all able to keep finding these films to restore, that they are somewhere, that they are saved, that you I love what, once again, what Film Masters is doing is it kind of just reminds me of, as I said earlier, those Mill Creek multi-film horror sets. You're finding a lot of those films that I saw for the first time in the grainiest, worst version possible. Like, what goes into creating a slate of films? Like, what kind of research goes into? Because I'm sure you have to figure out who owns the rights for it, what the best print is, and then I imagine a lot of the people who are involved in the making of the film are no longer around. So when it comes to the restoration side of things, like, how do you stay true to the film without being revisionist towards it?
It's a great question. So we were lucky. I mean, we did a number of the film group Corman films when we first came out with our first initial slate of releases. And we're very fortunate in terms of having some great contributors. And that's really the sort of the success of Film Masters, is the fact that we have some amazing contributors that help us with editorial, with production, with research, with writing, and doing these amazing commentaries and whatnot. And then, of course, the fact that Roger Corman was still alive during the time that we were launching the company was extremely helpful. Because Daniel Griffith at Ballyhoo, who does a lot of our special features, had interviewed Corman several times. And we also had Tom Weaver use some of the existing interview footage that he had to build out some of these special features, and even include some recent Corman conversations. So it's not every day that you get to have a director, producer from a film that was made over 60 years ago to participate in the production in 2024, 2025. That's highly unusual. And we were fortunate enough that Corman was still with us then. And then I think that we have to really lean on the historians. So if we're just putting a film into queue that we want to release, we also have to look at who would be appropriate and available to be the commentator or to actually write the liner notes. What would their level of interest be? Are they going to do a good job? Do they care about the film? In the case of Tom Weaver, Tom is the iconic Monster Kid. He's written numerous books about the Monster Kid culture and Monster Kid films, and he actually is passionate about these grade Z sort of sci-fi horror movies that are extremely low budget, many of which were on those Mill Creek 50 movie packages that you and many other people would get at a Walmart for $10. So the proposition of making a 4K copy of Beast from Haunted Cave or the Ski Troop Attack, or any of the Corman films that we've released, and then putting that level of effort into the project is also predicated on having contributors that are equally as passionate to be part of it, that really don't want to necessarily make fun of the film, but they want to find a lot of anecdotes and contextualize why these films were important in the canon of the entire kind of genre film world. And I think if that gets done correctly with the right people, it elevates the release to a whole new level. And then you're able to have that experience that you had with The Tormented. I mean, Bert I. Gordon's an amazing, director, and certainly, made some incredible films. Tormented is a great film. It's not, in terms of grade Z films, I think there's much worse films than Tormented. It's beautifully shot, great cinematography on it. The storyline is pretty strong. The acting isn't bad. You get an excellent soundtrack, and it looks beautiful. Now it looks beautiful because of the work we put into it. But I think that when you look at a film like Tormented that's cleaned up, that has an array of special features, you appreciate it differently, as you did. And I would like more of those experiences to come out of what we do, where people might have dismissed a movie because maybe it was never released as a decent viewable version, and it was just sort of put onto a dump bin sort of multiple disc, overly compressed copy. And even the stuff that we're doing was something weird. A lot of these films probably have never seen HD, at least, or 2K or 4K transfers. And you appreciate them in their correct aspect ratio. You appreciate them with cleaned up audio. And I think every film is, a candidate to get released. I think what we do, we're kind of taking on the orphan films, the ones that are in the public domain that the bigger home video companies won't see value in. They're going to go after studio titles. They'll chase major studio releases, where we're looking for a good copy of a film print to a movie that no one has ever seen in good resolution yet.
Mm-hmm. I recently had a gentleman by the name of Matt Harding on my podcast. He does a lot of marketing work for Severin Films. And I had him on to discuss the Al Adamson film Frankenstein vs. Dracula. And I was talking to him about how releases like that from Severin, or one of my favorite releases you guys did was the Backwoods double feature. In a lot of cases, the work that people like yourself or Severin or Vinegar Syndrome or whoever put into these films is the last living record of these films. So, for example, Dracula versus Frankenstein, they had the founder for Severin, I can't think of his name at this very moment.
David Gregory.
Thank you, David Gregory. He did that fantastic Al Adamson documentary a couple years ago. So he had all these interviews of people who are involved in these films, and they're getting up there in age. And their recollection of what making that film was like is probably going to be the only stories we're going to have from that set. So the reason I like the Backwoods double feature so much is because I hadn't seen Common Law Wife or Jenny wife/child before. So that was fun because I have a love for Hicksploitation. My family's from the South, and I understand how problematic the Hicksploitation genre can be, but I think that's also why I enjoy it, because it hits a little close to home. But you had one of my favorite film personalities, Millie DeCherico, involved in that, and I learned a lot about those films from her work on that film. That you can't just go buy a book about Larry Buchanan. Well, maybe you can, but there's not many. He's not a John Ford-like figure.
You're right, and thankfully, God bless, someone like Millie DeCherico, who's an amazing person, a very, dear friend of mine who I've known for years, but also the disservice that the community kind of lost when Turner Classic Movies kind of let go of the underground, and then
I know.
when Millie was no longer, because, and again, this is when you're dealing with corporate companies that, I mean, I remember doing a lot of work with Turner for TCM Underground. And to me, that was amazing because these fringe left of center films were being, it was like a tastemaker show. Like, she was able to curate and program this amazing community of films into underground. And she knew that was her wheelhouse. That was what she did. She was a huge expert and fan and historian and all this stuff. So I think that, again, you look at sort of the streaming world and the program, TV, you don't have that any longer as much as you did years ago. And losing TCM Underground was a huge loss. I was gutted over that. So yeah, having someone like Millie to be available to do a commentary on a Larry Buchanan and actually have the foundational knowledge to do it well and have the expertise, there's an incredible community of people out there. And that's why whenever we choose a title, it's finding the right people. You mentioned Dracula versus Frankenstein. That was Independent International. So Al Adamson and Sam Sherman. Sam Sherman is one of my best friends in the world. And he's also my mentor for, kind of helping me navigate what I've done for the past decade with Film Detective and Film Masters. And he's someone who, when he was very young, he was like us. He was a film geek. So in the 1960s, Sam Sherman, who would go on to become, the co-founder of Independent International and put out Satan's Sadists and Dracula versus Frankenstein and Nurse Sherry and all those films. But before that, Sam was a 20-year-old guy that loved film, that loved being in this sort of business. And he was able to save a lot of Poverty Row films out of like storage bins and places that were going to junk them. So we owe so much to someone like Sam Sherman for film preservation, because the films of those Poverty Row, and I hate using Poverty Row because I think that they weren't necessarily poverty. They were just lower budget than some of the majors. But you look at like Majestic, for example. Majestic Pictures, they were a smaller studio, but they made great films. And we've done a bunch of those with Sam. So we did The Vampire Bat as Film Detective years ago. And we did The Scarlet Letter, which was another Majestic film with Sam. And Sam has preserved and saved all these original film prints that are now, thankfully, with like the Library of Congress and UCLA. But I don't think he gets enough credit because that whole kind of world of what he did with making the drive-in films, which was amazing. But before that, Sam saved hundreds of films out of, kind of getting into dumpsters and things like that are now available. And so one of the hardest things that we have to contend with is sort of the category. Like, we could put out a horror movie every month and do well with it, but we have so much more. We have B westerns, we have like film noir titles, we have pre-code. There's all these other categories that we want to explore. And Sam's got a bunch of stuff that we still want to go after. We were able to license Creature with the Blue Hand from Sam, and he also owns domestic rights to Web of the Spider. But the cool thing was that Sam had actually retooled the Creature with the Blue Hand and made his own concoction called The Bloody Dead, right? And that was what Independent International would do. They would go out with a film, and then they would kind of retool it and go back out again and kind of get more exhibition out of it. So he was a master at repurposing titles, but also he was able to take things that people were less interested, like The Scarlet Letter, which pretty much had been relegated to obscurity. And that was the first film Sam actually put out theatrically. And he became kind of, do you know who Kroger Babb was?
No.
Okay, so Kroger Babb was one of the biggest sort of like barkers of exploitation films. And he would do a film that was like the birth of a child, and he would go out and exhibit that, and he would hype it beyond belief. Kroger Bab was, kind of someone that just would exploit these bizarre films to a massive audience through just sort of like almost like P.T. Barnum mentality. And he actually had a film which was a local cast of people that were doing a passion play of the Christ, the crucifixion, and they had filmed it in 16 millimeter. And it was like in Lawton, Oklahoma. And the guys that were filming it, you could actually see the telephone cables and the telephone poles behind Christ on the cross. That's how low budget it was. But he ended up putting it out as the Prince of Peace and added some new footage. And he took something that was worth next to nothing and made, at the time, what was equivalent to millions of dollars today. So Sam had known about people like Kroger Bab and a lot of these sort of amazing exploitation distributors. And he was able to take the Scarlet Letter, create new poster art, and go out into the market again with a film that had been made 30 years earlier. And that was how Sam actually got into the business, was retooling the Scarlet Letter because he owned the rights to it. And that was how he got into the business effectively. Then he ended up meeting his partner, Al Adamson, through this actor, Denver Dixon. And so he's got an incredible history. There's so much more to Sam's world than independent international pictures. He's someone that doesn't get enough credit for film preservation, and he's someone that needs help too. He's fallen on some hard times, and a lot of people have been ripping off his library, and they'll buy the Severin films and they'll put them on like the internet. So piracy is a big problem. It's a problem for us. People just rip the media and put it on YouTube, but more importantly, people like Sam who are actually rights owners to a lot of films. He's an 83-year-old guy trying to battle these streamers who just feel like they can take his property and do whatever they want with it. So that's another challenge, is you put out physical media, you put all the money into it, you're trying to survive as an indie, and people just take the media and rip it.
So what do you do about something like that? Is there anything that can be done?
In Sam's case, yes. You can hopefully find someone who's willing to help you, or have an attorney. But that's not cheap. Sam's gonna launch a GoFundMe campaign to raise money so he can get legal help, because he's he's in a bad situation. He also has a daughter who's sick too. So we're going to be promoting a GoFundMe campaign for Sam Sherman soon.
Well, I would when that goes up, let me know. I'll help promote it as well.
Great, thank you. And in our case, we try to obviously protect our stuff, but you can't. YouTube and things like what we release. I suppose we could copyright the new matter to some of the films that are in public domain, but you never. It's whack-a-mole. When someone gets something within 24 hours, I see it on YouTube.
So that actually brings up a question I've always been interested about. When something is in the public domain, you have the ability to release it, but then do you own the rights to your specific restoration or your scan of that film? Like, how does that work?
We do, and effectively that's how I believe it should work, is that if you put a whole bunch of money into your release, it's your copy. And I think that it is protectable. Like when Criterion puts a film out that's in the public domain, let's look at, the Tom Neal film Detour. It's a public domain film. But I think that by right of what they've done with the restoration, that copy is protectable. And I think that anyone that's doing significant restoration should have the ability to enforce copyright to that, because that's creating new matter. And a lot of times people would do these sort of cheesy colorizations, and they would file a copyright to the colorization. I think that's really bogus. I'm not into colorizing black and white films, but that's one thing people have done over the years, is colorize the film. But I think if you're doing significant restoration, you can file a copyright to that. It doesn't stop people. There's a whole culture of people that just, anything that gets released ends up on YouTube, a week later.
So, and I think obviously piracy is always going to be a problem. It's been kind of the bane of the film world and the music world for a very long time. I also feel like, and you'll have a different perspective on this than me because you actually work within this world. I just want to. It hasn't quite worked out for me yet. I've noticed from being on the fan side of things that I feel like a lot of people don't really understand how much work goes into these releases. It feels like to me that a lot of people just assume, well, they get a scan of the film. They don't even know how that works, how much time that takes. And they just put it onto a disc. If it's not too much inside baseball, can you kind of walk me through, like, beginning to end, like a truncated version of what all goes into, say, putting out something like you have an upcoming release coming, Monster from the Ocean Floor, or even Night of the Blood Beast? Like, where do you begin?
So it's very different when you're running a company that releases orphan films or public domain films than if you're, say, Warner Brothers or MGM that's dealing with a vault of film negatives that are hopefully preserved well. In our case, it's a matter of getting elements and then having to determine, is the element that we're working from good enough to release? And in some case, like, technology has changed everything. The film scanning ability to take a 35 millimeter release print that's all scratched up and scan it to 4K and then run it through restoration tools that take out deep emulsion scratches and dirt and dust busting is incredible. Back when I was doing this in standard definition, you had a regular film chain that was transferring film to tape. Okay, so your master was coming off of a film in standard definition, and it was going on to a beta tape, or like analog. So the number of lines and the resolution that you were compressing to put into a DVD was so much less information than if you're able to go line for line in terms of the resolution and get full resolution. And now with 4K, you're able to actually reproduce that. So you're seeing full resolution detail to not just what you're seeing on the film, but to enhance that too with the sound. So the dynamic range of the optical track is going to be different than what you would have had previously with all these new bells and whistles that you can add on to it. So we do that. We scan the film, usually 4K, and then we evaluate it and say, how bad is this? Is this a terrible situation that we're going to be fixing it for 6 months, which was the case for Night of the Blood Beast? It had holes in it. The film had like burn marks through the middle of the emulsion, and it had shrunk. So it wasn't stable. It was actually moving around. And we were able to make that look a whole lot better. It's not perfect. But when you look at it against what was out previously, it's night and day, because you have 35 millimeter and you have 4K scan. You've got detail that you can't even imagine. And you also have the fact that all these imperfections are now fixed. You can still see, a little bit of hairlines and things that were sort of residual, but a lot of this does amazing software cleanup, and you're able to, almost like Photoshop. So you know how Photoshop works?
Yeah.
You take, let's say you had an old family picture of yourself from the time you were like a little kid, but it's faded, and you've got some water damage on it, and maybe there's like a hole through your shirt. You can Photoshop things. So the tools that we're working with film restoration are similar to what one would do in Photoshop. And we also have amazing people too. I have an amazing team of like a guy who does our color correction, who's an award-winning colorist, and he understands all the different film stock. He also understands the pedigree of the film era, so he's not going to try to make it look too artificial and modern from like a 70s grindhouse film. But also with black and white, you still need to correct the grayscale, and sort of like the black levels sometimes get crushed. And like we had to, when we released Beast from Haunted Cave with Ski Trip Attack, we had a 16 millimeter Ski Trip Attack, but it looks great. And that's because I have an amazing colorist that knows how to actually manipulate the levels, the black levels that might get too crushed, and bring the grayscale into a better balance. And then I have an amazing guy who does our audio, who actually, he and I did a lot of our music stuff previously. So he understands how to remove the hiss, the ticks, the surface noise. And there are tools, but there's no replacement for someone who has experience and has a reference point and isn't going to make it sound too sterile and remove the film. That's the other thing too. We still want it to look like film. We don't want it to look like it's sort of, like almost too clean, and then the grain gets removed and it looks like black and white video, right?
Mm-hmm. So what do you do? So you something like the Door-to-Door Maniac, you restore it, you make it look good, you make it sound great, and that's also another thing I have to say. Unless I'm incorrect, I feel like almost all of your releases have been films with mono soundtracks. I don't think you've done anything with Dolby Surround or anything
No.
which for me in the world of physical media reviewing is a point of contention with me with a lot of reviewers who don't understand stereo and how it works. But that's a different discussion. There's so much fidelity to those mono soundtracks. There's times where I'm actually checking. It's like, wait, is it just coming out of my center? Because it sounds so much fuller and bigger because you pull as much fidelity out of those tracks as you can. So I just wanted to compliment you for a moment. But something like Door-to-Door Maniac, you put it out, you clean it up, you get some nice special features with it. What do you do with that restoration after that? Is this for archival purposes, or what do you do with it?
So in a perfect sort of fantasy world, it gets seen on the big screen. And then it goes into our archive, and we have the native 4K scan that's available to show through exhibition. We actually did do a fair amount of our Corman films into some really cool venues. And of course, I think the fact that Corman had passed away, and there were a lot of tributes out there, but we did get some decent theatrical on our restoration for Little Shop of Horrors and the Terror when we put that out. And we do have it. We do have a theatrical distributor. We work with the American Genre Film Association, AGFA, and they work with film masters. They work with Something Weird, and they go to screening rooms. They're a theatrical booker. And they'll take our catalog and make it available for someone that might have like an art house theater, or like a film club, or they're doing a film festival. So that's kind of cool. I'd like to see more of them, but not everyone's going to want to show like Common Law Wife theatrically. It's going to take a certain type of venue to do that. And then if a programmer actually does do that, it's getting an audience to come see it theatrically, and that's why I think what Quentin Tarantino did with the New Beverly, that's that's like a fantasy, like in terms of what we would like to see. I'd love to see all of our films at a venue like the New Beverly, and get some exposure so a younger audience could go see the film projected on the big screen with the new restored version. And maybe he'll program some of our films at some point. But he does mostly. What's cool about the New Beverly and what he does is they show 35 millimeter prints.
Yeah, I think that's exclusively what they do. And if there's a film he wants to show that doesn't have a print, he gets one struck.
Yeah, that's right. I actually, it's funny because one of the films that we put out in September is a film that he's a huge fan of. We put out a film called Redneck Miller, and
I need to pick that one up still because it looks so much fun.
It's a really crazy exploitation film. But he championed the film. He got a print of it, and he showed it at the New Beverly. And he might have shown it at Elmo Draft House, or somebody showed it at Elmo Draft House at one point. And it became kind of a thing that it had a following. And when I acquired the film print of Redneck Miller, I thought, yeah, this has a little bit of an audience. Maybe we'll sell 500 copies. And we sold out of 1,000 copies literally when we announced the title.
Are there still copies of it available?
Yes, it's still on Amazon.
Oh, good. Then I'm going to have to pick one up before they go away completely.
But I was shocked. I mean, that's the kind of thing that you say, who the hell's going to buy, this sort of limited edition Blu-ray of this exploitation regional film.
And that's what I'm passionate about. Like, I'm not going to pretend I have anywhere near the reach someone like Quentin Tarantino does. But the reason I like talking about labels like yours and some of the films you're putting out is because I'm just always hoping that, like, if I can turn one person on to this and they'll go pick up a copy of the Backwoods double feature, which is definitely the one that I've been that and Tormented have been the ones I've been promoting the hardest for people. It's like when they're like, oh, I've never bought anything from Film Masters. What do you recommend? Those usually be the two that I recommend the hardest. And it's because, like, I want these films to have another life, and they do with someone like Film Masters putting them out. And I'm not saying this because we're talking with each other. I truly think you guys are putting out very stellar work. And you have become one of my favorite new labels, and I just want more people to see these things. And part of that's just my own personal interest. I love regional cinema. I love weird little stories about, like, oh, this guy used to own a vacuum store and then decided to go make a movie. Like, I love stuff like that. And
well, I mean, that's the interesting thing too, is that back in the 70s, when those regional films were being made, like our very first release was the Giant Gila Monster and Killer Shrews, right? Mm-hmm. And the film's sort of producer was the owner of a drive-in movie chain. So he had the ability to take his films and distribute them in his own movie theater. That's perfect, right? Like you have a captive audience. You've built up an audience. So that's why I say kind of the dream of the Tarantino scenario, where you actually have your own screening room where you can curate program. And it's kind of like having your own podcast, right, Michael? Like, you can turn people on to things. I think that's what a lot of original filmmakers were able to do. Either they had connections to these regional drive-in theaters and regional sort of second-tier theaters that were just looking for anything that they could promote that was going to be promotable. And there was a whole era of regional films in the South in the 70s. You get into like the Bill Rebane films that were, that he's a great example of a regional filmmaker that had high aspiration to, he was in Wisconsin, and
that's where I'm from.
He built his own film studio, and he ended up getting all these kids and neighborhood people to be in his films. And of course, he got some people from Hollywood too. But I think that era was amazing. Like, I don't think that we'll ever see that again on that scale. You'll see different iterations of regional things, but making a 35 millimeter film in a regional place and then getting it exhibited nationally and being an independent film distributor, that was incredible. And there were so many of them. There were all these smaller distributors like Sidney Pink out of Florida and Urbane out of Wisconsin, and Jerry Gross and all these people, that you've probably heard of. They were all making money. They were all going to the French Riviera with their movie posters and doing foreign licensing deals. And the business, from what I've heard, back in that era, back in the 70s and the 80s, was a lot of fun because people would be able to make money. You could make a film for, $25,000 and potentially, turn around and sell that and make a couple $100,000. Then you'd go back and make a better production, maybe get better actors and, have more of a budget to do, special effects. And that was kind of the fun part of, watching how these films would come out and you get an appreciation for them. So, yeah, I love the regional films. I love the low budget, the orphan films, and I love talking about them. I love restoring them. And I love the fact that people like you actually care about them and want to promote them on your podcast.
Oh yeah, I love them. And you mentioned Bill Urbane. He's still around. He's still kicking. I don't think he's made anything in a while, but he just did a big screening for I'm drawing a blank. The
Giant Spider Invasion?
Giant Spider Invasion. Thank you. I remember Invasion and Spider were in the title. He did that. He just did a retrospective thing with that film and set up a little museum of all the props and everything he still has set up. And he's still living here in Wisconsin, just kicking around. And
yeah, I actually I did some production work for Shout Factory back in 2019 or 2018. I actually went to Saxon, Wisconsin to interview him for a Mystery Science Theater box set. And I stayed at his house overnight. I've known Bill for years, but he lives kind of like off the grid. You're not going to get a great cell phone signal. And and I got to go out and see the chassis and kind of the guts of the Beetle that was used for the Giant Spider Invasion. And I love that. I love the fact that, this is a film that made a lot of money for the guy and for others that distributed it. And he's still, at his age, talking about it and promoting it. He made a film called Monster A Go-Go.
Yeah, with he did that with Herschel Gordon Lewis.
He didn't do it with Herschel Gordon Lewis. He actually did it by himself. And then he ran out of resources.
Oh, that was the story. Okay.
He didn't complete the film. So the film started as Terror at Half Day.
Okay.
And then Herschel supposedly, there's conflicting stories. Supposedly Herschel needed a second feature, and Bill sold him or licensed him the footage. Herschel then added the go-go music and the surf tone music, renamed the movie Monster A Go-Go, put it out. From what Bill says, it was never meant to be more than a one-off. And then Herschel assumed ownership of the movie. It came out, over the years as Monster A Go-Go. Eventually, Bill ended up getting the rights back to it, and but there's never been any great copy. I think the closest copy came from a 16 millimeter print that was used for the Weird Wisconsin collection.
Yeah.
But that's again, that's another a weird, like Frankenstein of a movie, right? Like Monster A Go-Go. It's a great name and it's kind of fun and everything. But I wonder what Terror at Half Day would have been like if he had finished it. Would it have been better than Monster A Go-Go? Who knows?
Yeah, and I appreciated how outspoken Bill Urbane has been about things. He's just a hoot to follow, I have to say. He's you're definitely gonna get his opinion.
I mean,
want it or not, and that's I think he's a true blue guy, and I love the films of Bill Urbane because I have a just connection to any film made in Wisconsin. I'm from Wisconsin, so I try to find these weird little pockets of films of weird stuff being made. And I hope things keep getting put out. Like Vinegar Syndrome did some. They did Bill Urbain's film Blood Harvest. They did Blood Hook, and then they did Blood Beat. And then obviously there's the weird Wisconsin box set. But I hope someone like a Film Masters or a Severin or something just keeps finding these weird little regional Wisconsin films and putting them out. Because I, for one, am just fascinated by it.
No, it is fascinating, and I think for these regional films, do you know of a movie called Carnival Magic?
I do, yeah. I actually have the Severin a copy of that movie.
Okay, so the film's director was a very dear friend of mine, the late Elvin Feltner, and Elvin was again like these characters, like back before I was even doing this, there were these amazing characters who I met later in their later parts of their lives. But Elvin Feltner was like a Kroger Bab. He made a lot of money buying regional television stations, and he became a multimillionaire back in the 70s. And one of the things he also did was he would buy up film libraries. So he bought the entire PRC, Producers Releasing Corporation library. He ended up getting all these other films. He started a company called Almy, which was with this guy Al Schwartz. He became a big international distributor. And then when he had all this money, he had this brilliant idea to make this children's film called Carnival Magic with this sort of amazing chimp and this magician and this sort of regional sort of carnival. And he truly thought this was going to be the pilot for what would lead to maybe like a Saturday morning kids show. He thought that this was going to be a family film, but he didn't realize that, when you hire Al Adamson and you put his sort of stable into it, and then the monkey gets goes through vivisection, and there's all this sort of violence. It's not really a kid's film anymore. It's sort of something else. So the film became a complete curio for people. And then it was discovered. It was discovered because there was this guy at the Elmo Draft House years ago that had found a print at the theater or someplace. He had a print of it, and they did this series at Draft House called Weird Wednesdays, where they would show a film like a Carnival Magic. So I ended up getting in touch with the Draft House, and Elvin at the time he had leukemia. He was really sick, but throughout his whole career and his friendship with me, he wanted this film to be seen. It was his mission to have this thing put back into the theaters. So the folks over at Elmo Draft House flew Elvin to Austin, Texas, and they did a big screening of the film. And I didn't know if 20, 30 people would show. It sold out. The film sold out. And Elvin did a Q&A to a sold-out crowd. He had a big feature in the Austin Chronicle, and it was amazing. And he was beaming. This is a guy, he had leukemia. He was kind of at the end of his life. But when he was on stage doing the Q&A, he was like a kid. He was so inspired. And you had a lot of people who were fans of the movie, shockingly. Mostly because this guy was showing, he'd kind of championed the movie.
That's beautiful. That's a beautiful story. And I think it really just shows in the most, this is going to sound way more pretentious than I mean it to. It just shows the power of cinema. It just shows that when people truly care about these things, it can bring a lot of joy and magic to people's lives.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's sort of what happens in a screening environment. Or, it can certainly happen by turning someone onto a film. But I don't think you get the same experience if you're watching it on, like Tubi TV or YouTube than you get if you're doing it in a dark room with other people and having that sort of immersion, that immersive experience.
I completely agree. And while I'm a big, obviously, home media person, I've spent a lot of time putting together probably the best screening experience I can at home. I still prefer to go out to the movies and see things that way, experience it with people, and just people are the secret magic behind film.
Yeah. No, it's I love it. I love the fact that there's still venues that actually want to show um, older film or film prints, and um, hopefully that will continue.
Yeah, we have a pretty good one here. If you're ever in the Milwaukee, Wisconsin area, we actually are quite lucky to have 3 or 4 independent cinemas, which is quite impressive. But there's a historic theater in Milwaukee called the Oriental Theater. And when our local film organization, Milwaukee Film, purchased it, they did a lot of restoration on the theater itself. They brought in a film projector, and they still do. Film screens, not as often, but I also appreciate that they've been getting very interesting with their repertory cinema side of things, and they're showing these old movies. Like when I was first really getting into film, the only thing this theater would ever show was like once a month they do Rocky Horror Picture Show, or if Grindhouse Releasing was bringing their copy of Evil Dead around, it would maybe show that. But like I got to see, I'd never, as film fans, we all have our blind spots, which is kind of the point of this show. I had never seen a Preston Sturges film, and I got to see The Lady Eve on the big screen, which is probably the best way to see it. It's the best way to see it.
Yeah, no, I go every year to the Turner Classic Film Festival, and it's amazing. You see people, who are teenagers with their grandparents, and they're all fully immersed into the whole sort of culture of being in a dark movie screen, to see everything from pre-code films to newly restored films that have not been seen that are making their debut. It's an amazing event because you're kind of like, it's that Todd Browning, sort of moment, the one of us, line. You're with your people, and everyone's sort of celebrating it. So I think, it's healthy, it's good. I worry, a little bit at times, like what it's going to be like, and 10 or 20 years, is there still going to be any enthusiasm to do this stuff? I mean, but then again, when I was doing it, with that Reefer Madness DVD that went on to my friend's documentary, I never would have thought 20 years later that we were doing these 4K scans of all these, films that were already in the market, through something weird or through some of the other companies, and being able to put them out in high resolution like this. So you never know.
Definitely. So I want to start wrapping up here a little bit. So can you talk about whatever you're able to tell us what's on the horizon for Film Masters?
Well, I think the thing that we're kind of trying to scramble to close the loop on is our next special edition release, which is the first production Roger Corman did, and that's Monster from the Ocean Floor. And that's going to be coming out next month. We're excited because that actually is from Kit Parker, who owns the rights to it.
I know Kit Parker was involved with that first big Laurel and Hardy collection a couple of years ago that I was obsessed with.
Yeah, so Kit Parker is another friend of mine who's an amazing film preservation supporter, has saved, like Sam Sherman, has saved hundreds of movies, and has his own film library that he owns the rights to, of which one of the titles that he owns is Monster from the Ocean Floor, which we've licensed. And thankfully, he has the original camera negative, which is amazing. It's not that often that we get an early Corman film that has the original camera negative available.
And that's another thing. I appreciate that you talk about your film elements. You don't hide where you've gotten things from. If there's you talk about what scan you did. Those little things, I don't know if most people care. I do. So the film, I truly feel the film nerds care about that stuff. And I'm looking forward to Monster from the Ocean Floor. I've never seen it, so I'm hoping that I'll get an opportunity to cover that for Film Masters because it should be an exciting release. Because some of those really early Corman films I haven't seen as much of, and I'm glad that you guys have been putting them out. I still need to pick up a couple.
And then we've got a whole bunch of other things that we're kind of putting into restoration right now. We've actually done the scans, and the hardest thing for what we do is just the amount of time it takes to get all the restoration work done and then the special features. So we'd like to think we're going to have 12 releases out in 2025, and that's the goal. But it's just always time, is never on our side, because we give ourselves 5 months and 6 months, but then we find out that the restoration is taking longer, and we're going back and doing another version of it to try to make it look, a little bit better than it did previously. So we're working on that. We've got a couple of double features planned. There's some blaxploitation films coming out from us. There's some more martial arts films coming out from us. Some pre-code. And God willing, we might actually press our first 4K Ultra disc.
And I bet that has a lot of challenges in itself.
Well, it is. It's expensive. It's way more expensive to do the authoring on 4K. And then I wonder, too, with the stuff that we put out, is it that meaningful to have it in 4K Ultra HD versus Blu-ray? And I don't know yet. I mean, you have to have a really important film. I think slasher movies from the 80s or more contemporary films definitely lend themselves to a demographic that's probably more inclined to buy 4K discs, but I don't know if you necessarily need 4K for everything that we're putting out.
For me, so I think 4K, a lot of people have a very misconception of what a 4K disc does, or is like what it does for film preservation, not film preservation, but film viewing. I feel people hear 4K and they think it's going to look like a brand new movie, and when in a lot of times they are grainier than regular films because you have a lot less compression, so you can actually see all that wonderful film grain. I'm a big fan of the 4K format, mostly because I think what you can do with high dynamic range is pretty spectacular. It can still be extremely impressive, but subtle at the same time. And to have that difference between the brightest point and the darkest points, and just have all those extra shades so that way you don't have crushed blacks and you can get some of that, more of that fine detail, I think is phenomenal. I think people have a misconception about it. As I said, I think they're expecting it to look like a movie that just came out, and that's not the case.
Correct. And I think that, the reality too is that, we do have 4K scans on everything we've released, mostly on Blu-ray.
Is that for future purposes, or why are you doing 4K? Okay.
Yeah, that's for future purposes. So we more often than not do our film scanning in 4K to have the 4K file if we ever wanted to go back and put out a 4K Ultra disc, or have it available for someone that would actually want to get that native file for usage later. That's sort of the archive file. That's the new master file. And the question would be, out of everything Film Masters released in 2024, what title would be the one that, would lend itself best to a 4K Ultra disc release? That's what we're kind of looking at right now.
And that's tough because I think there are some spectacular looking black and white 4Ks, because you've done a lot of black and white films. My heart of hearts goes to thinking it should be potentially a color film. Something like The Swiss Conspiracy comes to mind. But, Criterion's first 4K release was a black and white film. So, I don't know what the correct answer is. But my mind goes to Swiss Conspiracy for some reason.
And I don't know either. And it might be that we just, like we could have taken, because we had the OCN for Monster from the Ocean Floor, that could have been our first 4K, but it would have been so bizarre, if we had come out with that movie as an. I don't think that audience, the Monster Kid generation, would necessarily want that, and I don't think that the audience that consumes 4K from Severin or ever releases would want that title on 4K. So I think it's going to be the right title, and maybe I don't know. It's a quagmire of a situation because it's more costly to author it, and then to press the actual media is more costly too.
Mm-hmm. All right. So my last question before I stop bugging you for the night. So out of the slate that Film Masters has put out, is there anything in particular that you are extremely proud of that you'd want someone to, if they've never purchased from Film Masters before, this is their first time hearing about it, what's one or two releases that you, besides all of them, that you think that someone should go into first?
It's a great question. I too, like you, am a huge fan of our Backwoods double feature. Yeah. I liked that title as a double feature when it was released by Something Weird, and it's probably not on a lot of people's top 10 lists of Something Weird releases out of the many titles that have come out over the years from that company. But I'm very proud of that, and I love that actually is a thing, that we were able to find elements to make those into the presentable 4K Blu-ray release. And I think the extras are great on it too. That's a good one. I also think that the other one that I'm most proud of was one of the first DVDs I had put out years ago. I had a company back in 2000 called Marengo Films, and we put out 16 millimeter films as double features onto DVD. And my first disc I put out as a double feature was The Terror in the Little Shop of Horrors. And then 20 plus years later, I was able to put those two together as a Blu-ray, and I think they both look stunning. And I would say if you're a fan of Corman, if you're a fan of Boris Karloff, who's great in The Terror. In fact, The Terror was used, if you're familiar with the Peter Bogdanovich film Targets.
Oh, I love Targets.
There's that great scene when Karloff is at the drive-in theater and he's coming at the shooter. And in the background is Karloff and The Terror.
Yeah.
I love that scene. I love that film. It's one of my favorite films.
Mine too. So your vote's for The Terror and for the Backwoods Collection. Mine is also for the Backwoods Collection. And then I just got to keep singing the praises for Tormented. I love Tormented. And mostly love Tormented because it went from me feeling very indifferent about seeing it the first time to me being so passionately in love with it. So Tormented. It's a gothic beach movie. What else do you need?
It is a gothic beach movie. It's a great way of describing it. There's a lighthouse. There's sort of all these. So yeah, like films like Tormented, Night Tide. The Dennis Hopper film.
Mm-hmm.
There's some kind of romantic sort of gothic nature to both of those films. Like there's definitely some connective tissue between Tormented and Night Tide, I think.
Perfect. Well, Phil, I really appreciate you coming on and hanging out with me for the last hour and a half and talking about Film Masters. If people want to keep up with you or Film Masters, where can they find you guys online?
Filmmasters.com is where we put all of our information about our new releases. Our YouTube channel is linked to that. You also...
you put out films on YouTube as well, don't you?
We do. We put out a lot of stuff. Like sometimes when we release a raw scan of a film, we'll put, like when we put Tormented on YouTube, we put the 35 millimeter raw scan version up there. And that was kind of fun, just so people could actually see it. And we'll put everything from old TV serials. We've got a ton of films in our archive, and not everything is going to come out on Blu-ray. So we've populated a lot of just stuff that we have in our collection on our YouTube channel. And it also allows us to see kind of what people are engaged with too. Like, that's another way of sort of testing the waters, is if we have a film that we're not necessarily sure it's going to do that well, if no one's interested in watching it on a YouTube channel, it kind of tells me maybe it's not the best, candidate for a Blu-ray restoration.
Makes sense. And I believe on Instagram, you guys are film_masters. I just double checked that.
Yes.
All right. Well, everyone who's been listening to the show at this point should know where to find me. You can find me at Michael_Viers on Instagram. The Shameless Picture Show is just the Shameless Picture Show on Instagram. And then you can find me on Letterboxd at Viers102008. So I appreciate everyone for tuning in for this great interview I had with Phil. And I'll see you next time. Shame time, shame place, Shameless Picture Show.
The Shameless Picture Show is a proud member of the Cinepunch Podcast Network. The show is recorded in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and is hosted and produced by Michael Viers. The show is created by Michael Viers and Nick Richards. The Shameless Picture Show is edited by Austin Proctor of the Frightmares Podcast. Amanda Viers is the show's graphic designer and a big help behind the scenes. Our theme music was composed by Austin Proctor with narration by Nick Richards. The end credit music you're currently enjoying was generously provided to us by the band 10 Speed. And an extra special thank you to all our Patreon supporters and to our generous sponsors. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, Audible, iHeartRadio, and directly at Cinepunch.com.